This is going to be the very first event we've had in our now going on 3 years of existence in the field of children's ministry. So I'm very excited to have this. We've had this in our scope for quite some time and delighted that it finally is able to happen, and we have an exemplary presenter for you tonight. So I think you're going to go home with a lot that will cause you to think and refine your already existing children's ministry. I'm quite confident of that. Creating and using a guidebook for your children's ministry is the overarching theme, and our presenter will accept questions and explain that in just a moment as she goes through her presentation. But then there will be a larger block of time that could be more generalized questions related to children's ministry beyond the scope of just the creation and use of a guidebook before we close this evening. So, well, again, my appreciation to Nikki Hunt from First Christian Church in Johnson City, who's our guest presenter tonight. Nikki is a native of Johnson City, graduate of East Tennessee State University with a dual degree in Spanish and psychology. Sensing a call to ministry, she did attend Emmanuel School of Religion and completed her Master of Divinity here. She's been on the staff at First Christian Church in Johnson City since 1998. Has focused largely on children's ministry during that span of time. However, this year has begun a transition to provide leadership in the area of outreach for the congregation there at First Christian. I got a kick, Nikki, out of what they have on the website, which I actually did read the website, and it tells what Nikki likes. Well, she likes pizza, she likes sushi, lip balm, all the normal things. Then it says she really likes working with fifth graders. So, when you have the courage to put that on your public website, that tells you that we have God's gal for us tonight to make this presentation on children's ministry. That was awesome. I love that. So, in just a moment, join me in welcoming Nikki. Let me offer prayer of thanks for this evening, for your safe arrival, and we'll go forward. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this ongoing ministry here at the Emmanuel Institutes, the opportunity to bring men and women who have keen expertise and a real heart for you and for your church to present on these various topics. And tonight, Father, I am thankful that finally we have reached the evening when this children's ministry presentation will occur. Thank you for Nikki's willingness to prepare and work hard and gearing up for tonight. We ask your unreserved blessing upon her, that she would present what we certainly need to hear to help our ministries and our various churches to be enhanced. So we dedicate tonight to you, and do so in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Welcoming Nikki Hunt.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here with you. I do have to apologize. I have some sinus issues going on, so if I stop to drink water or sniffle, I am sorry. But I'm glad to be here tonight, and I'm very excited to share with you. I have a lot of information, so I've really tried to kind of simplify it to some very basic, specific topics in relation to this guidebook. With that said, I do want to have a time at the end so that if there are questions or comments or things you want to talk about that I did not hit during this conversation, we can talk about those things. Do stop me at any point that you want to, because either you didn't understand what I said, it didn't make sense, you have a question, you have a great idea, or you think I'm just wrong and want to say, I'd do it differently. And that's fine with me, because I can learn from, I want to learn too. I want to be up front. I don't have a guidebook at First Christian. That's not something we have. We have packets of information for different groups of people. And that's something that as we talk through tonight, I want us to think about, because you need to figure out for your own church what's the best fit. With that said, it's also helpful for you to know that when I look at children's ministry, I look at children's ministry as a ministry that works with 3 different groups of people. Anybody want to guess who those 3 different groups of people are?
Kids.
Yes? Yes? Volunteers. Kids, parents, and volunteers. And that's not something that I realized until about 5.5 years ago. I always thought children's ministry was just about the kids. And frankly, that's why I went into children's ministry. And well, I realize now, the larger a church becomes, or the more involved a church becomes in children's ministry, the more involved you are with adults, whether it's volunteers or parents. And so I wanted to let you know that, because that's also reflected in how I'm going to talk about a guidebook. If that's not how you all look at children's ministry in your churches, then you'll want to think about that too as I talk. And my hope is that I've done this in a general enough way that is still specific, that it'll help you guys out, but it'll also give you the freedom to figure out if you want to do a guidebook for your church, you can do it in any way you want to. It doesn't have to be the way that I've said. Also, I may use examples from the church that I serve at, but that doesn't mean that that's the way it should be done, that you have to do it. And you all, and I'll reference this later, you have a copy of a sample guidebook. I've removed everything from it that says our name because the things that are in there are pretty general, but some of these things are coming straight from what I do at First Christian, some of them aren't. And so I will use examples, but that's only because that's what I know. So with that said, let's kind of move into our topic. You should have a handout, and what I've tried to do is those blanks fit along with the PowerPoint, so hopefully that'll just kind of give you an easy way to take notes. Like I said, at any time, stop me if you have questions. Creating a guidebook is a big task. And so what I want us to look at is the why. Why would you want to even have one? The how. How would you go about doing this? And then kind of the specifics. What would you want to do with a guidebook to make it specific to your church? Because I think every church has its own feel, its own culture, its own budget, and its own size and needs. So you're going to need to tailor that for your own ministry. What I gave you is something very, very simple. If I were doing this at First Christian, that's not what my guidebook would look like. But it's also something that's a great place to start, content-wise. And to me, the most important thing is the content, not the glitz and glamour that goes along with whether or not you want it in black and white or color or glossy or half page or full page. So, current topics in children's ministry. I wanted to mention this because as I was looking through what I'd put in a guidebook, the current topics in children's ministry influenced what I'd want to put into a guidebook. And there's 4 areas that to me right now really play a role in how I interact with children's ministry. These may be different for you. One of them is equipping parents. This is important to me because I think that they need to be the primary spiritual caregivers of their children. With that said, we know as children's ministry volunteers or staff that we're helping out in that area too. But one of the things we want to do is really equip parents because kids leave us, they go home, and we want to make sure our parents are equipped to train their children to follow Christ. Another important topic in children's ministry is safety. And so that's something that's reflected in the guidebook that I worked through, because to me, safety is one of the key issues and the key things that I'm attentive to in children's ministry. Because if a child walks into your ministry and isn't safe physically or emotionally, they're out the door. And so it doesn't matter what you're going to teach them if they're not safe. Or at least that's my opinion. Another topic is what we teach kids and how. What are you going to be teaching them? And how are you going to do it? That's an important topic. That could be related to learning styles. That could be related to teaching styles. It could be related to a scope and sequence or curriculum. And then the 4th topic that's pretty important to me right now is welcoming newcomers. Whether or not you have a lot of visitors to your church or just a few, or none, welcoming the newcomer is important, because if you don't have a lot of newcomers to your church, then that may be an area that you need to work on. If you have many visitors to your church, many newcomers, again, you're going to want to make sure you're doing a good job because you have a lot of people coming. And so that's something that you need to think about with a guidebook. How does that help the newcomer? Is the guidebook made for newcomers? So those are 4 topics that are pretty key to me right now. What are some topics that you see in children's ministry as being current, kind of hot button topics that affect how you all do your children's ministry? Or are they pretty much the same?
This is almost equipping parents in what we teach kids about. We're talking about what does family ministry look like, and how do we make that curricular development happen so that a family with 4 different kids in different ages are doing 4 different things, and the parents are, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
More cohesion.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, some churches are doing that. We've tried that for a year once. It's a lot of work. It's great if you can make it happen. It's a lot of work. Other topics? In family ministry, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that because family ministry is a very big thing right now. And that may be something that you want to look at with a guidebook. If family ministry is very much a part of your church, more than, say, children's ministry, youth ministry, adult ministry, you may want to look at creating a guidebook that's family ministry in scope. You can still use some of the basics we'll talk about tonight, but you might want to have more conversation about what your adults are learning. If you are doing something in relation to family ministry, like a universal curriculum where everybody's talking about, say, Noah one day, you may want to include that information in your guidebook. So family ministry, that's a great thing to think about as we're looking at a guidebook. Other topics? Do these pretty much hit what you would think of? Okay.
I want to appreciate the equipping parents thing. I think I've just started, but I think I've not been thinking about that enough. I've been thinking kids, but the kids are not there if the parents are not bringing them, and in place the parents. I need to really remember that. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and that's not something that I have a natural bent to. I enjoy hanging out with the kids. With that said, I think that's where family ministry is so important and such a great type of ministry because, one, your kids, for the most part, aren't going to come in the building if their parents aren't bringing them or an adult isn't bringing them. Also, when they're at home, you want to have them with somebody that's going to reinforce what they've been learning at church or that you can be reinforcing what they're learning at home. And how great is it if you're teaching the same things to your whole entire, family at the same time, same lessons, same values. So I have a few questions for you all. When you hear Children's Ministry Guidebook, what does that mean to you? What do you think of? Or do you think of, I have no idea, that's why I'm here? You have no idea that's why I'm here? Okay.
I think of it as something you can hand to a newcomer.
Okay.
Or you could offer to the families that are already there who might have lost their guidebook. That lets them know kind of what's going on in the children's ministry area, maybe for that year.
Okay.
And kind of where we are as far as numbers and things. Like at Grandview, often we have to move rooms because we have a larger group that moves up, and a smaller group coming up into that same age group, and just kind of giving them that information, as well as the safety issues and what we do.
Okay.
Just all the things that you mentioned, things that we might offer for parents.
Okay. I mean, that's what I think of when I think of a guidebook. It's something that kind of guides you through your ministry. And whether you're looking at children's, and you could do the same thing for a youth ministry. You could do this for any type of ministry. You could even do it for your whole church. One of the things that I noticed when I was online Googling children's ministry guidebooks is you can find some that are literally 90-some pages, or you can find some that are, 10 pages or 20 pages. There's just a wide gamut. And that's something you need to think about too, is how much information do you want in it? Because I thought 90 pages, I'm afraid I'd lose people. At the same time, I'm thinking, well, if it's, a comprehensive guide to everything for parents, children, volunteers, a visitor section, it could take 90 pages. And I thought mine would probably be 90 pages because I'd want to put so much in it. Another question I have is, does this concept seem daunting at all to you all to create a guidebook for your ministry? Does it seem overwhelming at all?
We can't get people to read one page. I can't imagine 90.
Well, I fully believe that if we could come up with scratch and sniff letters and booklets, I think that is a sense that we haven't fully utilized, the sense of smell. But I haven't done that yet. And maybe I'll spray all my letters with strawberry scent or something, and maybe people will read them. But no, it's a good point. So it might seem daunting, one, because are people even going to use it? Am I going to spend all this time and effort doing something that nobody looks at? What I would say is, and this is just an off the top of my head comment, I think that visitors are really appreciative of things like this. I think that it'll probably be easier for them to read it, more likely for them to read it, than someone who's been in your church forever, because they may think they already know everything, possibly. So then that becomes, the key is what makes what you're doing important enough to get someone to read it. And maybe it's because somewhere in there's a coupon for something, or the first person to read through the book and call you, when's a dinner out? I don't know. But what's going to get them to read it if they've been there forever? Okay. So let's think then about, those are the questions that I wanted to ask you. What would be some of the benefits of a guidebook? I'll throw out what?
Training of those who are already.
Okay. Yeah, training of people that are.
Teachers who think they know what they're doing, who aren't doing the right things.
Okay. All right, yeah. No, it's a good point. And, I don't know if you all have this difficulty sometimes, but if you have volunteer meetings, probably the people who come to the volunteer meetings, well, I shouldn't say probably. Perhaps you might have people who come to the volunteer meetings that have been there forever, and they probably aren't the ones that need to come. And you have lots of people who've served forever but never come to the meetings that you wish would come. And so trying to get those individuals to read something like this, yep. Other benefits?
Ask a question.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to Guidebook. The Guidebook, it sounds like, could be very comprehensive, but it also could be very basic.
Mm-hmm.
Come through and it lays out the safety, or what's the safety going to be in this building, all the procedures, policies, and everything. But when you talk about just the ministry to the fifth graders,
mm-hmm.
that's probably not in the Guidebook. You have a special section, something different for the volunteers who are going to be working with fifth graders.
Right, and that's where we need to figure out for our individual churches what works best. You might find at the end of this, I'd like to have, whether you call it a guidebook or a manual, I'd like to have one for each age group. A first grade volunteer manual, a second grade volunteer manual. And that's where knowing your church volunteers, knowing your parents, knowing the likelihood of them reading something. Because some places people might love to read, or they might just really get into doing something like that. And having a big book or a booklet would be great for them. You also know, too, what are the needs of the church? What are the commentary that's coming? Do people feel like they're not informed? If people feel like they're not informed, then doing a guidebook is great because you can say, here is everything you need to know. I tend to lean, when I was working up a sample, and we're going to work through this sample booklet that I have, I tend to lean towards a little less comprehensive, more on what are the basics with safety? What are the basics on what your child will expect when they get in the classroom? What's expected of you as a volunteer? Kind of some simple things. At the same time, you might think, well, if I'm going to have 5 or 6 different little manuals, I'd rather than just all be in one booklet, have a table of contents, and people flip to the section that applies to them, because maybe in 2 years, this other section would apply to them too. Then that becomes another question, and I think Beth hit on this, made me think about it, I jotted down a note. Is your guidebook something that is done for 1 year, or is it done for an indefinite period of time until it becomes non-applicable? And if that's the case, then you might want to think about, what do you put in? Are you going to want to put in classroom locations if those could change every year? But if it's only for 1 year, well then, yeah, just put in those locations. And so those are things to think through too. There's lots of things to think through, but and that affects the length of your booklet as well. Some other benefits of a guidebook is it just puts everything in one place if you were going to do a comprehensive booklet. What I realized is I have all these different policies that we use in our church, and we provide for volunteers and we provide for parents, but having them in one place, that's kind of nice. So you can just grab it and go. Like we talked about earlier, trains volunteers, it aids them. It also really aids the new volunteer, one that maybe has not served before. Helps your parents out. If your parents aren't sure what's going on in the ministry, or sometimes, well, we don't know what's being taught to our children, or what kind of relationship building activities go on in class. If those are questions that are being repeatedly asked, then those might be things you'd want to include in a guidebook, and that would help your parents. Also, and this is probably not the most important reason to do a guidebook, but it can provide a history of your ministry. Kind of shows you where you've been, so that down the road, you might know where you need to be headed. You know, if you have all of your policies, your guidelines in a booklet, and let's say, as it has in the past 5, 6, 7 years, some of the needs in children's ministry have changed. For example, in the area of safety. You know, I think it's really interesting to look back, wow, 10 years ago, we weren't doing anything like we're doing now, because those needs have changed. So if you have a guidebook, it does kind of provide you a little bit of a history of where you've been. It also, I think, can help you target areas that are lacking. And what I mean by that is that if you put together this booklet of what all your policies are, or of what all your information for your children's ministry looks like, and you realize you have no guidelines whatsoever on safety, that might help you realize, wow, I have some areas that are lacking. Or if when you create your guidebook, you realize, wow, one of the most important things to me is, say, scripture memory, and I've never once mentioned that in my guidebook, then that might help encourage you to figure out, well, if I feel it's the most important thing in my ministry, but I've never mentioned it, does anybody else in the ministry know it's that important to us? So figuring out how to really highlight areas that need to be improved. So, starting a guidebook for your ministry. What are some things that you would want to include, or things that you'd want to keep in mind when you're creating a guidebook? And I would just encourage you, as I'm talking, to jot some things down. If you think, wow, this would be something great, great for a guidebook for our church. You know, what do you want to keep in mind with regard to structure? What do you want to keep in mind in regard to things that you would want to include? For me, some key components of a guidebook would be, you know, things that a volunteer would need. What does your volunteer need to know? Do they need to know all of the upcoming events for the year? I don't know. Maybe for you all they do, maybe they don't. Do they need to know the classroom locations of all the other ages? Do they need to know the safety policies? Do they need to know the diaper changing guidelines? Do they need to have diaper changing guidelines at all? Things like that. But that to me is a key component of a guidebook. Another one is, what does a parent need? That would be another key component. And as you're thinking about this, you know, this goes back to one of the original questions is, do you have a comprehensive book, or do you have a specific book for each area? And so whether you do it comprehensive or specific, these are still things you'd want to keep in mind. And then what does a child need? Most likely, a child is not going to sit down with your children's ministry guidebook and flip through it. With that said, you'd want to include what a child needs, because the parents are going to want to know that you're doing stuff for your children. So what are a few key things that you would want to include concerning your ministry? You might want to think about, what are the highlights of your church? For example, one of the things that I really enjoy doing with our church is a 5th grade mission trip, 5th grade parent and child mission trip. That may or may not be something I'd want to include in a guidebook. If I was really tailoring my guidebook to parents and children, I'd probably want to highlight that, because that's something special that we do, maybe a paragraph. If you were to do something like, well, for example, if special events is very big to your ministry, you might want to include a section of that and kind of talk about these special events. If you wanted to keep this booklet year after year, I would suggest only keeping the events that you do every single year, like your annual events. At the same time, if you wanted this to be something that you did just once a year, you kind of updated it every year, then you might want to put the dates of your events and those things. If for you all, scripture memory is key, like that's a big deal with your church, you really want to make sure your kids are memorizing core verses, you might want to include that in your guidebook. So if you want to take just a minute, maybe turn to the person next to you, if you're here with a group, just kind of maybe chat just for a minute or two about what are some things that just off the top of your head you would think would be important to include in a guidebook for your church. Something that would be important for your church, for their volunteers, for the parents to know that you're doing. All right, if you all, anybody want to share what are some things you've been talking about in your groups? What are some things that you think, I'd want to throw in there if I were having a guidebook that would be something special for our church?
Our children's ministry philosophy fits with our larger church's philosophy.
That would, Yeah, that would be important, and that'd be really helpful for a parent to know.
I was just sharing that sometimes you have names for your programs that are foreign to a visitor, and they may have no idea what you're talking about, and so it's a way to articulate. If you have a clever, catchy phrase for what your 5th and 6th grade group is called, or a program that you run, it's a way to articulate what that is, and so that you're not alienating someone because they don't know what something is.
That makes sense. Yeah, definitely. Steve and Kay were talking about the fact that Steve and Kay are missionaries in Mexico, and so some of the kids that are coming to their program are going to come without parents, so, or most of them. And so I think that poses something to think about in regard to a guidebook. Maybe you tweak your guidebook to be more children's friendly. Maybe it's more, just a couple pages folded in half, really bright. Or maybe it's geared to the parent and evangelistic. Yeah. Or you could take a booklet, and maybe go and do a home visit and take it to the parents. But if that's the case, you'd probably want to do something very simple.
Our manual probably would be evangelistic in that you mentioned special events. Well, we would probably throw other things into it, such as a community center and all the classes, all the activities that are happening in the community center. This would obviously be for 6 months at a time, actually. So every 6 months, we probably produce those new folded papers, as you just mentioned, and put in special events and stuff like that to invite the parents to become more active. Yeah.
Yeah. One thing you may want to think about too, I think that Anna makes a great point. Like if you have ministry names, like for example, maybe your nursery is called the Sprouts, and your preschoolers are, I don't know, seedling. Yeah. Defining those. You may want to, and I saw this in at least one guidebook online, and I don't know what I think about this, but I don't have an opinion really. You may want to include a section on other types of definitions. Like if you're gearing your booklet for parents, do you want to include a section about, say, learning styles? Or if you're doing this for volunteers, teaching styles. Things like that, those types of definitions. Or if you have phrases or types of things that you do regularly in your ministry. For example, in our ministry, when the kids are being very loud and not paying attention, we say kids, and they respond with time, because our ministry is called Kids Time. So we say kids, they say time. You might want to include something like that, in there, that kind of a definition or explanation. Lots of things to think about. Other thoughts?
I think expectations for volunteers and parents, and kids too.
Yeah, expectations, it's a great place to put those expectations. And again, just thinking about how you would have a structure. I thought this would be a good time for us to take a look at that sample guidebook. And I will just kind of walk you through what is in this guidebook. You can ask questions, thoughts, and we'll work through this until our break. And then after the break, what I'd really like us to kind of look at are all the different options for putting a booklet together, because there's a lot of ways you can do this. This is very simple, very straightforward. This is if you don't have a budget for a guidebook, if you don't have the capability of doing color, if you don't have anyone that's going to be able to help you design something into a half-page booklet. I'm not great at technological things like this, so honestly, I'd need some help doing this probably. So if you don't, this is just to say, hey, you can have a guidebook no matter what your budget, no matter what your skill level is. So this is just something simple and straightforward. The first thing is, I would make your front look a little more jazzy than this. If you have a logo for your children's ministry, you may or may not, that'd be a great thing to pop on the front, your logo, or the name of your children's ministry. Also too, if you are doing this each year and changing it up, you'd want to put the date on it so you'll know if it's an outdated copy or not. I think we started out here with a welcome letter. I think the welcome letter is a great place for your children's minister, or if you'd prefer, maybe even your senior minister or both, to put some sort of letter saying, hey, we're so glad that you're involved in our ministry. Here's what this guidebook is all about. It doesn't have to be long, just something short, sweet, that explains what's going on. Then the table of contents. And this is important simply because if you have a really long booklet, you're going to want people to be able to jump around, look around within your guidebook, and not feel like they're lost. If it is a short guidebook, you may not feel like a table of contents is very important. It may not be needed. And that's something that you can think through. Something that we haven't talked about would be if your children's ministry has a particular mission. The mention was, though, Scott mentioned that he'd want to include for his church the fact that their mission for their children's ministry ties into the overall vision of their church. I don't know if your churches have missions for their church, like a mission statement for your church or a mission statement for your children's ministry. But if you do, it's a great thing to include in the guidebook. If you don't, I'd encourage you to get one. And you might say, well, how do you do that? You sit down and work on it. Which, to me, short and sweet is the most helpful. I remember spending probably a whole day, at least, after we'd brainstorm, then coming for a whole day working with one of our children's ministers years ago, trying to come up with our mission statement. And we did, and we used it, and it was a great mission statement. And then when, about 5.5 years ago, when our staff changed in children's ministry and we had a new team, we sat down and we worked on a new mission statement because frankly, none of my staff or I could really remember the one that we'd worked on. We'd worked on it so hard and we used it, but we couldn't just like spit it out. We couldn't just say it right off the top of the cuff. We'd have to look down. And we thought, if we can't say it easily, that's not a great fit for us. And then we also realized, and this was the most important reason that we changed it, was that I had this new vision that we really needed to be working with parents and volunteers in addition to the kids. And so we wanted to make our mission statement reflect that. And so ours was very simple. Kids Time cares about parents, volunteers, and kids. And then what we do is we break down the word cares into what our core values are. And so each one stands for something different. So if you wanted to test me, you could ask me to say what those are, but hopefully I'd remember them. But to us, that was very helpful. So we would put that on here. And if you wanted to include the mission of your church, you might say, well, why would you want to do this if it's a children's guidebook? Well, just to say A, hey, it ties in, or B, just so people know what it is, because maybe if these are people new to your church, they've never seen what it was. It also lets them know that the children's ministry is a part of the church and that you all care about what's going on, not just in your ministry, but everywhere else. Another thing that I think is helpful from the guidebook is just if you have staff people in your children's ministry, or if you have key volunteers that are maybe leading certain areas, you might want to put this in your book. If that changes very often and you don't feel comfortable putting it down, then fine, don't. For us, I'd probably list our staff and contacts because we have a few different people on staff, and I'd want people to know how to get in touch with them. You may be concerned that if you want this guidebook to last for 5-6 years, that you don't want to put any names in there. And if that's the case, just leave it out. You might want to put a general phone number, contact information. If you have a general email address, put it general. Not a big deal. Or just even putting something like on the bottom, how to get connected with our team, and just putting something basic. And that's up to you. I see the benefits of going either way. One thing is if your church has a website, you can use the website for more current things and this booklet for things that last forever. So you don't have to worry so much about current events, current people in specific roles, that type of thing, because it's already on the website possibly for your church. The next section that I thought was important to include was the safety section. These guidelines in here, I'm not going to go through all of them, but these are things that I think that it's helpful for parents and volunteers to know. They're not specific to volunteers, they're not necessarily specific to parents, but people just might want to know, how do you keep your kids safe? These particular guidelines are things that we do in our ministry. Doesn't mean that they're the ones you should do. You might have lots of other guidelines you'd want to pop in here, and that's great. But if you have a name tag system, you might want to explain how do kids check in? How do they know what to do? You may say, well, I wouldn't want to put that under a safety section. I'd want to put that under a section applying just to kids. And that's fine. And that kind of fits into how does your mind work? And that's something I thought about. My mind naturally jumps safety, curriculum, parents, volunteers, kids. And I just see safety as such a big thing that I have it kind of off on its own. You may think, that should just fall under volunteers. That should be a small section under parents. And so think about that for you all. I think it's important for parents to know all the different things you offer for safety, as well as for your volunteers to know that. You know, if you have first aid kits available, if you have walkie-talkies where people are communicating with each other, put that in there. People want to know those types of things. Also, I think it's helpful if you have guidelines for your volunteers as far as age that they need to be in order to serve in a classroom, perhaps the number of people that have to be in a classroom, if you have a waiting rule before people can serve. Those are things that are helpful to know, and that's something you might put under volunteer guidelines as the title. You might put it under, you might just break it up into age requirements, 2-person rule, 6-month waiting period. Any of these things, if you think, what are you talking about? Raise your hand, or if you want to talk about it during our questions section, that'd be fine. And then your church may or may not have a volunteer process. If you do, I think it's great to include in a guidebook. Not only does it help your volunteers know this is what they need to be doing to get connected, it would help your new volunteers know how to do it. It would help your parents know what's expected of a volunteer before they sign on. I think new parents especially, and parents who are new to your church especially, are interested in knowing, hey, your church really checks out their volunteers before they put them in a class? Hey, your church makes sure there's always 2 volunteers in a room? I think people want to know that, and it makes them feel more comfortable bringing their kids to your ministry. You might want to include a section on health. For example, I call this sick season, when kids are getting sick a lot and volunteers are getting sick. You may want to include something like that. We have some specific bathroom and diaper changing procedures at our church. If that's something you have, you might want to include it. You may not. We do include, I did include this in here because I think it's pretty important that our volunteers know what to do, and I like parents to know that this is what we do. So for us, we'd want to include it. That may not be a big deal to you all, and so it may not be something you'd want to include. The next section, I thought, well, what would I think about being a kid in our children's ministry? So, like I said, the way my mind works is safety is such a big topic that I had its own section. Then I jumped to being a kid in our ministry. And then in a little bit, I'll do being a volunteer in our ministry, being a parent. Being a kid, there's tons of stuff you can put in this section. I tried to keep it simple, and this is a place where you would decide, do I really want to just put everything in here or not? For me, if I were a parent looking at what's being offered for my kid, at our church, we have 3 different kind of ministry areas within children's ministry. We have nursery, preschool, elementary. So I would divide those up. You might want to include, how do you promote your kids? Why is that important? I don't know if you've had experience with parents, especially preschool parents. They want to know, when is their kid going to move up to a new age group? Is it when they turn a new age? Is it at the end of the school year? How does that work? Those are things that come up. You might even want to include something, if you have a lot of children in your ministry that are homeschooled, you might want to include something in there about homeschool policy. I didn't include that in here, but if you and we have a homeschool policy, I just didn't put it in here, but if you'd want to, that's something you might want to include. Why? Well, if you have people asking you all the time, well, if my child's, 8, but this is the grade they're in when I teach them, what class do they go to? You might want to have that in a book. At the same time, and this goes for anything you'd put in here, you may not want every single policy you have in print in a booklet, because if there are policies that you often make exceptions for, you may not want it in print. And that's up to you guys. And what I mean by that is that if you know, for example, if you have a guideline, let's say, this is a hypothetical, maybe you have a certain age of child, age of teenager, that you allow to serve in your children's ministry. Let's say the rule is you have to be 15 before you can start serving in children's ministry. and you know that your church is always breaking that rule and putting in 13-year-olds, don't put that policy in your booklet, because people will just come and show you, well, hey, it says 15, why are you letting a 13-year-old serve? So think about those kind of things. And if you're concerned about people coming and asking you questions, then you may want to think, is that something you really want to put in your guidebook? Programming. You know, being a kid in your ministry, what does programming look like? Again, you could be as specific or as general as you want to be. If you want this book to last for several years, I would say make it really general. I know for us, we're going to have classroom locations change from year to year based on the size of a certain class. We may change our format on a Wednesday night because, gosh, in the spring of 2009, that was a horrible setup. We want to do it better in 2010. So you might not want to put things specific. But if you know every year you're going to redo this, then it's not a big deal. For us, you know, we have weekly services. I know that that means Saturday nights and Sunday mornings. I also know that that means Wednesday evenings. So I just put it very general, the times and the days, and I know those aren't going to change. Special events. I know we're going to have special events. I didn't list what those specific things were, except for like VBS, our elementary musical, and our mission trip, because I know all of our other special events, they're going to change. We do offer some classes in regard to, we call them Following Jesus classes. And that would be something helpful for parents. If your church offers classes to children who are interested in making a decision to follow Jesus, you might want to include something basic in there. If you offer, say, baby dedication, like a baby dedication service where you let people know, hey, these people had babies during the previous year, you might want to mention that. Again, it's up to you. Then a few other things in regard to what's it like to be a child in your ministry. You might want to include a scope and sequence. Your ministry may or may not have this. Scope and sequence would be, what are your kids learning and when? This would be a great place for like where Scott was talking about trying to get your teens and kids and adults kind of all on the same lessons. This might be a great place to put something like that. You may feel like it's a better fit in parents, in the parents section. To us, one of our values is relationship building, so we'd want to include that. How do we build relationships? You might want to think about, how do you address allergies and medical alerts? How do you address custody issues? Those might be things that you think fit better in safety. Again, this is up to how does your mind work, but even more importantly, how does the mind of the people that are going to be reading this guidebook, how do those minds work? And you can't always, I think I should make this comment, you're not going to be able to please everybody with a book like this, and you probably already know that. So, as soon as you make a book like this, there's going to be people that probably would say, why didn't you include this, or why didn't you take out that? You need to feel good about what it is that you put in the book. If you do have a mission statement for your children's ministry, putting in information that ties directly to that mission statement, you can't go wrong. Because if anybody was ever to ask you, well, we were putting in things that were pertaining to our mission statement. I think people would just be excited that you had a guidebook, though, so I wouldn't worry too much about anything like that. Another section, we talked about being a kid. What about being a volunteer? To me, this is where it gets, what all do you put in? What do you not put in? Because there's so much you could put in. You could put in job expectations. Those could be very general. Be on time. Call if you're gonna miss. Please prepare in advance of your class. Those are very general. But you might have job expectations that are very specific to age groups or to volunteer roles. For example, we have two very basic volunteer roles, shepherds and station leaders. Our station leaders, they've got to prepare in advance. They have all the responsibility for lesson, activities, things like that. We have another set of volunteers who are shepherds. Their basic responsibility is taking care of our kids and making sure they get back safely from the bathroom. So those are two very different jobs that you might want to put those expectations differently. With that said, depending on the hour of service and the age group, there's some specific things that go along with each of those. So figuring out how much detail you want to go into. Do you want to include all of that in this? Do you want to include it maybe in an appendix in the back? Do you want to just say, hey, welcome to the first grade, let me give you your first grade small manual? Those are things you're just going to have to figure out what works best for your ministry. One of the things that we did do for our volunteers, this was something we started a few years ago, is we didn't have a guidebook, but we would give them a folder that had our mission statement, safety guidelines, some daily reminders, things they need to remember before they get into class, our fire plan, things like that. So we'd give them this, and then we would give them a volunteer information video, and I'll talk more about this a little bit later. The contents of this could be in a guidebook, could not. And this again goes back to what works best for you all. The other thing to think about is what's being put on here that important? Because you will be, using a lot of paper. And so just being earth conscious, are these things that really have to go on a piece of paper that are copied a lot? So think about those things. If you have a specific training process, you'd probably want to include this in your volunteer section. For me, like I said, I had that safety section, and that's where I talked about our volunteer process. But you could, if you have a volunteer process, you may think it fits better under a volunteer section. Again, relationship building is key to our volunteers. How are they building relationships? So we'd put a section in for that. A few other things, just some how-to tips that we put at the back of the book, like an appendix. How-tos. Maybe your teachers need information on how to gain your class's attention when you're losing it, how to prepare in advance for a game for 5 different age levels, things like that, some how-to tips. And then this might be a great place to put an encouragement to your volunteers about why serving is important. Have a section for parents, which this is something that really kind of depends on what your church is doing with parents. If your church doesn't do much with parents and you don't see children, volunteers, and parents as 3 key components to that ministry, you may not even want to include something specific to parents. You may feel like this whole booklet is for parents. So thinking about that. And the appendix, the reason I added an appendix was simply because I thought a lot of this information, people might just see, oh, I don't want to look over this. I'm not going to read this. So if you put it in the back, it just says, hey, it's important, but it's not so important that you have to see it straight up. For example, information that's specific to the nursery, or if you had a scope and sequence, or those how-to tips. So with that said, that is a walkthrough of a sample guidebook. This is just a sample. It's an idea to kind of get you thinking about a possible structure. This is very basic. The font is the same everywhere. There's no graphics, there's no color. So what I'd like you to do, and we're going to, I think, break in just a moment. Okay. We have a few more minutes. So let me ask you, do you have any questions about this? Because when we come back from the break, I want us to look at this structure and how would this work for your church? How would you consider cost and graphics and budget? What are the needs of your culture? So from looking at a sample book like this, are there things that are surprising to you, things that you think, oh, why would you ever include that? That's crazy or so unimportant. Or do you think, wow, I don't even know what half this stuff is? I don't know. Thoughts? Comments?
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Do you ever provide for the volunteers information on guidelines related to spending, budget, reimbursement? If I'm a teacher, I may want to purchase supplies, but I might not know if I have the green light to do that. If not, how do I get it?
That's a great point. The answer would be no. I've never given that in writing to anyone. That's a great point. I think as I'm thinking about this, I think that'd be something where I would be careful about putting that in print, especially if you have a lot of volunteers. My only thought being with that is that if people realize they can spend money, you may have more people coming in and buying things and getting reimbursed, and you may not have the budget for it. What we do is typically we would do that more, hey, do you need anything? Great, we'll go pick it up for you. Or if people say, oh, I'd really like to have 40 purple markers in my class every day because that's my favorite color and we use markers all the time. I'll pick them up. Can I get reimbursed? Sure you can. And we do it more on a case-by-case basis. With that said, if one option, depending on the size of your church, depending on the size of your budget, if you have an amount of money that you just say, you know what, this is going to be $400 per year that I just allot for volunteer needs, then you might want to include something in there that says, hey, we have a set aside amount for volunteer needs. As you need, you can go pick those items up. The thing you'd have to be careful of is you'd really have to monitor that budget, because once it's gone, it's gone. So I'd be a little leery of putting that in. But it's a good thing to consider, because you are going to have people who want to buy things and not know what to do. Another way to do it would be to put something very general in a guidebook that says, questions you might have as a volunteer that haven't been addressed. Questions about how do I get my supplies? Questions about how do I get new curriculum? Questions about how do I add something to a lesson that wasn't already in there? If you have questions about that, just give us a call. And that might be a way to really address that without throwing yourself out there to possibly get into some trouble financially. So, other thoughts?
I think that's a good point too, because we have a lot of teachers who have a class all the time who always bring food, for example. And then someone fits in for them and didn't bring anything, and the kids are like, well, where's our Kool-Aid and cookies? But then the teacher didn't know it was the expectation, but it's not really the expectation, but it really is. I mean, so suggesting that on the front end.
And that,
teachers always pay for out of their pocket, and the volunteer thinks they need to pay for out of their pocket. I mean, it does get a little complicated.
yeah, and that's something that I almost think is better done verbally rather than in print, like at a teacher's meeting, if you have volunteers that come. Or if you know that, this may be something where if you know that Susie always teaches that class and always does donuts and she's going to be gone for 2 weeks and you know John is subbing, saying to John in advance verbally, hey, just FYI, they always bring donuts. I can pick those up for you, or if you want to, just give me the receipt. I think that could maybe...
Even to expectations. I think food and children's ministry on Sunday morning is a big deal. Do you have it? Do you not have it? Do you have it in your classroom? Do you only have it in nursery? Do the big kids go to the nursery to get the snacks? I mean, that's a good...
Well, no, and these are good things to include. You might want to think about that in a section. Also, you know, you may want to have a section that just has to do with the nursery. And I don't know how many of you all are involved in nursery. That's a whole workshop unto itself if you want another children's ministry one. You know, labeling sippy cups, labeling diaper bags. Do you bring food in? Or what you might want to, the section that said health, you might want to include a section. For example, we had this come up about 2 years ago. Someone she brought in about 30 cupcakes one Sunday morning to share with the class. Super sweet. They were new to our church though for about maybe a month or so. One, we didn't know the person well, and so that was a concern. Two, we have children that have gluten allergies and red dye allergies and peanut allergies. We didn't know where the cupcakes had been made. Three, there weren't enough to go around because we had more kids than what the cupcakes were for, and we couldn't even figure out how to break it up. So we had to say to the parent very politely, I'm so sorry, thank you so much for the thought, we just can't accept these, here's why. Now they know that, and it's fine. That might be something you'd want to include in a guidebook, what your practices are about people bringing in snacks or things like that. But great point. And there are so many of those little details. One of the things, and I want to say it now so I don't forget, if you do a guidebook, have an editor. And you might even want to have 2 or 3 editors. And you might want those editors to not be somebody on your staff or a key volunteer. You might want it to be a parent. 1 for spelling, 2 for grammar, but 3 for content. Maybe you left out the part about labeling your sippy cups, and that would have been great for a parent to know. And so I think it's great to have an editor who could pick up those kind of areas.
Nikki, have you ever used like a focus group made up of parents and grandparents or something to give you feedback, not just on a guidebook, but on maybe your brochures and other materials, just to get some direct ideas whether it connects with them or not?
I would say no, we've not had a focus group. We have asked questions, more so of volunteers than parents though. One of the things, we've tried doing parent meetings and we've had difficulty in attendance with people coming to the parent meetings. So more of our feedback is through one-on-one conversations. We have in our meetings with our volunteers though talked about what's the best way to communicate with you. What do you respond best to? Letters, postcards, brochures, that type of thing. But a focus group may be a way to go. And if you actually only picked 10 parents to come, you'd probably get them there, and that might be a great way. So if you were developing a guidebook, that'd probably be a great place to start. Okay. Well, I would call this the creative portion of the evening. So if you're a creative mind, then designing the layout of your guidebook is a great fit for you. Like I said, I'm not great at technology, and so, working on maybe a publisher or I can't even think of other names. So you can tell how not good I am at that particular area. If you have someone, this is a great way to draw in a volunteer, or if you have a staff person on staff that does this kind of stuff, super. If you don't, which you very likely may not, then finding someone in your ministry or your church that's creative and capable at, say, designing brochures, booklets. It might even be a college student. This would be a great project for a college student or high schooler during the summer that could come in and help, especially if they're knowledgeable. So designing that layout of a guidebook. What you want to think about, a variety of factors. I think one is budget. It may or may not be an issue. I would think it would be an issue, depending on the number of people you have in your church, but it may not be. And so what are some things to take into account? Well, you do want it probably to look nice and inviting, but I think you can do that and it be less expensive than what you might think. I think one is color. Use colored paper if you can. If you can't, not a big deal. Maybe include some graphics. You want to think about, I've seen some booklets that have photos. Do you want your photos to be of your children in your children's ministry? If so, you need to get permission to do that. If you do that, then that becomes more outdated too. You may want to use generic photos. You may not want to have graphics at all. You want to think about the type of paper you use. Do you want it to be glossy? Do you want it to be matte? Do you want it to be 8.5 by 11, big? Do you want it to be folded in half? Do you want it to be stapled, spiral bound, all those kind of things? Some of those may be defined by how often you plan to do this. If you plan to update this every year, I would not spend that much money making it glossy and bound and all that type of thing. If you plan for this to run for 5 years, super. The one thing I would say is that I think most guidebooks are going to have to be edited from time to time. And so I would recommend not making it so expensive that it's just cost prohibitive to revamp from time to time. If you're going to do it in-house, super. You may not have to worry as much about budget. If you are going to have this printed and run by a company, then you're going to want to price check, figure out how this works. Is this something that is important enough to your church that your church as a whole wants to make sure this gets done? And what I mean by that is maybe talking to your senior minister. Is this something that we want to do as a church? Another thought is if you have a family ministry, or if you don't have family ministry, but the way you view your church's ministry is family ministry, do you want to do this together? And if so, then maybe the budget needs change a little bit. So kind of figuring those things out. You need to figure out for the layout, what is the length going to be? Do you want this to be comprehensive? Do you not? I see positives and negatives to both setups. I don't think that either's right or wrong. I think you just have to figure out for your church what's going to work best. If you know that when you give your volunteers a handful of pages to read before the beginning of the school year and they never read it, if you already know that, then probably giving them a 90-page comprehensive guidebook is not a great fit. But if you know that they're going to read what you give them, if it's like a couple pages in color, then I would tailor your guidebook to that. And that's not saying, oh, I wish my volunteers did a better job reading. It's just saying, hey, I know the time restraints my volunteers have. I know the learning styles my volunteers have. So I'm going to make my guidebook work for them. Same way with parents. So I lean to a little bit shorter guidebook. At the same time, you might really want to do a parent guidebook and a volunteer guidebook. I think that that's a nice fit in the sense that you can put a little more information in both. And you may find that some of the information is very much the same. But then there's a section where it's different. And so what you could do is have the exact same style, but on the bottom say for parents, for volunteers. So things to think about. If your ministry is run such that you have, for example, if you had a 5th, 6th grade ministry, or if you spend a lot of time and energy on your nursery, you may want to have a general guidebook and then a nursery specific guidebook, or a 5th, 6th specific guidebook. We do several things very special with our 5th graders. you might put that in an appendix, you know, for 5th grade only, for nursery only, things like that. What are you guys, I mean, as you think about this, what are you thinking? Do you all lean towards, oh, a shorter guidebook's better. Oh, a comprehensive guidebook's better. I'm just curious. I mean, what kind of speaks to you all?
My thought is to have a comprehensive one, you know, maybe not exhaustive, but that's a spiral, not spiral, 3 rings, so you can change it as necessary.
Oh, that's a
But
great
it's
idea.
also be digital, so that I can email pieces to people who are interested in that.
Oh, that's a great
I
idea.
can change it year to year and change the hard copy that's available to everybody, but also be able to print out just the pieces I want for parents or for volunteers or for visitors, so that I'm not all at once spending something and then have a stack of paper waiting to be handed out for the next 20 years.
That's a great idea,
Whereas
yeah.
I can print it as needed and make the changes annually if necessary.
That's a great point, yeah. Other thoughts? One of the things that jumps to mind, even listening to that idea, Kim, is that, you know, if you really are tailoring what you do to draw in visitors, or you're really trying to be attentive to what the visitor experiences when they first get in the door, you may want to have your guidebook be written from the perspective of someone who is reading it for the first time, learning about your church for the first time. And that may be a way to look at this. One of the things that I thought about for the volunteers, you're going to have long-term volunteers, you're going to have new volunteers. Your long-term volunteers may have all this stuff already in their head, and they probably don't want to wade through all this information. And that may be something that you want to think about. Do you have the for new volunteers? Or within a comprehensive book, do you put, you know, on your table of contents, items for new volunteers, items for individuals newer to the church? And that's where I think doing a guidebook can start to get really massive, because there's so many different things to consider, which then takes me back to why I think that we've kind of stuck with having individual pieces of information we've given out. I don't know that that's the best way, because I love, like we listed the benefits before, I love the idea of just saying, here, it's all here, read it. But I don't know what works best for your all's churches. Only you know that. And so then let's look at making your guidebook work for your church. How would you start a guidebook for your church? If you wanted to do this, how would you do this? You might want to look at, do you even have any of this in writing to begin with? For example, if you know, we always have 2 people in a classroom. We always wait 6 months before we put a volunteer into a class. We always have 16-year-olds in the nursery and no one younger. Or we always do X, Y, Z, but you only know this in your head and you've never written it down. That's a good place to start, writing down your guidelines and policies. I don't know. You all may have some written down, you may have some not. What I found is that in the past, let's say 6-7 years, we've written down a whole lot more than what we used to do in the past. And I think part of that's just because some of the safety needs in children's ministry necessitates us writing these things down. Also, we have more things come up, it seems like, in regard to promotion needs, homeschool promotion needs, allergy needs, custody needs. So we type all these things up because, frankly, we want to be able to look and know, what do we think about this? And find it. So that's where I'd start. If you don't have any of this stuff typed up, just start typing it up. You know, and you don't have to type it up in a guidebook format. You know, these are my policies for children. These are my policies for the classroom. The next thing I'd look at is, what's the look? What do you want it to look like? Like we were talking about the layout, you know, what is that look? What is the feel? If your church may have a look to how their marketing materials are. You may not even have marketing materials. You may think, what are you talking about? But if you do have a look, if you have a logo, if you have a style, if you have a color that kind of goes through your building, you may want your guidebook to reflect that so that it ties into the overall feel of the church. This is where, you know, having somebody who's creative, who has an eye for color, an eye for design, this is a great place to bring someone in to do that. Doing a guidebook is just a great way to get people involved, with different skills and gifts. So bring them in. If you have someone who is good at editing, have them edit the look of your guidebook as well. Then, after you figured out that look, or maybe before, make sure you bring in that cost factor. If you are going to spend money on this, how much do you have? Is this a one-time deal where you have this money, or do you have the money each year to redo this? Another thing to do at some point in that process is maybe just look at the guidebooks of other churches. Doesn't mean you're going to copy them, nor should you, but it'll give you some ideas of what's out there. Also, you can just kind of look at maybe children's books that are out. What kind of format do they have when they structure things? There are books that you can buy that are, basic introduction to children's ministry. Maybe flipping through what topics do they include when they're, training a new children's minister in those books. What are the topics they include? Could those be reflected in your guidebook? Looking at those types of things as well as the guidebooks of other churches can provide you with some information as to what you would want to put in it. But that's how I would recommend getting started. I think that if you're going to do something like this and you want it to be well used and a real part of your ministry, it's great to just give you the heads up to your senior minister, hey, I'm working on this. Why? So that they can support you. And I'm glad you agree. I would want them to know that. I also think that it's helpful for them to know that you're doing this because, one, the senior minister might think, oh, what a great idea. I'd love for all of our ministries to do this. And if that's the case, then you all might want to do this kind of in conjunction with each other. Or they might say, hey, we do think that family is important here, and we do value the importance of, role of parents. Let's do this youth and children's together. And you could do that, or youth, children's, adult. And so, one, you're informing your minister, but two, he may have a great idea for how to do this as a whole church thing. The other thing is, if you are making this guidebook to be something more than just, hey, let's pass it out at the end of class, but hey, this is really what you need to know about our ministry. If your minister is willing, they may or may not be, to say maybe at the end of a church service, hey, just want to say, look at what this, what we've got for our children's ministry. If you want to know more about our children's ministry, even if you're not a parent or volunteer, grab a copy of this. That's another thing that I hadn't mentioned before, but sometimes people just don't know what we do in children's ministry, and having a guidebook, hey, here you go. Especially if you're including volunteer roles in there, if you had a list of all of the volunteer opportunities, so we have a separate thing that we use at our church. That's a list of all of our volunteer opportunities, what the job expectation is, the amount of service time that's required, or not required, but that they're committing to, things like that. That's separate. You can include that in a booklet, it's kind of up to you. I think that that's a great thing to have on hand, whether it's in a booklet or separate, only because if you ever have people who are looking to get involved, but they have no idea where to get involved or what you do and how they could get involved in doing what you do, you can give them that pamphlet and say, here's all of the opportunities for you. Include things that are like behind the scenes or once in a while, because there's some people that want to help with kids, they just don't have the time or the ability to do it all the time. So including those types of things might be a possibility. So let me ask you, is there anything that you would or wouldn't include, or anything that you would do differently from, say, this sample guidebook? Like looking at this, is there something that just says to you, oh my goodness, take it out? Or is there something that you think, why on earth wouldn't you include that?
I think there's a challenge, at least in our church. I think there's a group of people who think, this would be great. We should have done this years ago. This is very informative. I want one on my bedside table. And I think we have to balance that because I think there's also a group, especially in children's ministry, maybe of established volunteers who think, why do we have all these rules? I love kids. This is a loving place. I've been doing this for years. And that actually would be a lot of pushback to having a guidebook where people say, I can't stand all these rules. I quit. I'm not doing it anymore. And would interpret this as constraints or something and wrongly consider that. But I think for us anyway, we would have to balance at least length and maybe details of policies, even though I think it's helpful to spell them out, but maybe not include them for everybody. Because I think some of the established volunteers would say, who do you think you are? But I've been doing this long and you've been alive. That kind of thing. So I think for us, that is a balance that we'll have to.
Maybe some of them could be on their focus group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Starting thing.
Yeah.
It makes the guidebook process ridiculously long compared to
Yeah.
a staff of 4 or 5 like y'all. But But it means that you start with that.
But that comes to knowing the culture and the needs of your church. This is not the same, but related. When we began doing background checks in our children's ministry,
We're with you. I know
that would be an example of some people think it's awesome, and so others may not. Others may think, why on earth would you ever do this? You know me, Nikki, I'm your mother. Although my mother was very supportive of this, but anyhow. And I could say, even my mom's had her background check done. But the idea is you have to set the vision for it. And I'm sure you already know that. And you can say, well, that's just great, Nikki, set the vision, but whatever, they're still going to shut you out if they don't want to do it, which is true. So figuring out how do you do it in such a way that you can set the vision, get buy-in, and still get done what you want accomplished, which is really hard. One of the things that I would think, and you probably already have this in mind, is are there some key people that have been in that church forever who ought to have that attitude? We shouldn't do that, we don't need this, but who are willing to stand by it because they see the value in it. And if you can get those individuals on your side, hopefully have them help encourage those other people along. Because one of the things that was great for us is that we had, I don't know, maybe a key 10 to 15 people, for example, when we did background checks, that I called in advance. There were people that have been in this children's ministry forever. One was my mom. Others, you know, male and female, young and old. Hey, we are going to be doing background checks. We want you to know this. We want to explain to you why. Will you buy into this? Can I say that we've called, not you personally, but 10 to 15 of our long-term volunteers, and they're backing it up, and they're willing, even after serving 30 years, to have a background check done because they know it's important. Can I say that? Can I include you on my list? And I did. I called 10 to 15 people, and then I could say, when I did a vision meeting for the people, hey, 10 to 15 people have agreed with me that this is important, and here's why we're going to do it, yada, yada, yada. The other thing is that when you are doing this booklet, if you know that you're going to get a lot of kickback because people are going to think, you have 20 rules for me as a volunteer? I taught in 1980, and our kids knew Bible verses better without all these rules than they do now. This is silly. Then you probably don't want to put all that stuff in the booklet. But you got to figure out what is key. And to me, what is key is, what are the kids learning? Are they building relationships? Are they safe? And tied into, I mean, back with the what are they learning? You know, are they coming to know Christ? And that's not a comprehensive list, but to me those are the things that jump out right off the top of my head as important. I want to make sure those things are in there. The other thing to consider is if you really think this is going to be tough to get into your ministry, a group that I think would love it would be your people new to the ministry. And so one thing you could do, even just to get it started, is just gear it to either new volunteers or visitors. Because my guess is if you have rules in your ministry, even your long-term volunteers are following them, whether or not they know it. And so if you're giving these lists of rules or guidelines, which are probably all for the safety of your children and all so they can better come to know Christ, if you're giving these to your new volunteers anyhow, put them in a booklet and maybe say, Children's Guidebook for the new volunteer, Children's Guidebook for the family new to our ministry, something like that. Provide them from the new people. One thought is your visitors, or those new to your ministry, are probably going to be so thankful to know that you have all of these practices in place and that you cared enough to put something in a booklet. They're going to be excited. Your new volunteers are going to be thankful that they know what they're doing. That's going to be a positive for you. The second thing I think is that if the people who have been in your ministry a long time see all the positive feedback that the people new to your ministry are having regarding the guidebook, they may be more likely to buy into it. Why don't we get a copy? What is this? Oh, we were trying this out. This would be helpful to you too? Great. And then you can develop one for them too. I mean, so that may be a way to start. Or that may just be wishful thinking and people may never like the guidebook. But my hope is if they saw positive feedback with new visitors, new volunteers, they might be more receptive to it down the road. So you might have a trial run with those who are new to the ministry.
Well, probably two things too. I mean, having it in print and then enforcing it. Bathroom policy, for example, we have it in print. We follow it all the time. Oh, I'm her sister, or I'm the daddy's coming in running. And do we always follow it? Oh.
Well, and that's one of the things I would say is if you don't follow it, I mean, if you have it but you don't follow it, don't put it in print. And that's my opinion. Because people can come, why don't you do all this stuff that you put in here? The other thing is that, is it really important to you? For example, if I find out that our diaper changing policy isn't being followed in our nursery, I'm going to be having some conversations because it's that important to me that it's followed to the letter. If I find out that our bathroom policy is not being followed, we're going to be talking with our volunteers. I mean, that's not an infrequent conversation. Hey, how's it going? Oh, remember, you can't walk down the hall by yourself. You know, those are things that are going to come up. So to us, we put it in because we follow it. At the same time, one of the reasons that I probably wouldn't include a homeschool policy at our church is that we don't have that many homeschooled children. And we have had more case-by-case situations. We have a general rule that we follow, but there have been some exceptions we've needed to make. And I don't know that I want to put that in writing in a booklet that goes out to everybody because there might be an exception or two. But even more, for example, one practice that we do, and I know we make exceptions all the time for this, even more so than homeschool, would be when we have visitors come who want to be in the same classroom who are different ages. Typically, our rule is you go to whoever's younger, that's the class you go to. Because our feeling is that if we send a 3-year-old with a 6-year-old, they're not going to get a lot out, but at least the 6-year-old could get some basic learning in the 3-year-old class, plus they could always help out and experience kind of a mentoring setup. With that said, I'm not going to put that in print because there are occasions when I make an exception to that. When Johnny comes in from California and he's in 2nd grade and his cousin's in 3rd grade and he's only going to be here 1 week, well, I'm not going to send the cousin who's always there to the 2nd grade class that 1 week. So there's no point in me putting that in print. Typically it's when I'm at the Welcome Center, oh yeah, that's okay, let's go. So those are things to think through. And that's where you want to make sure you're kind of careful about what you put in a guidebook because you don't want to put so much in it that you're getting hung up all the time on policies that you've got but you don't really follow or you don't always enforce. So things to think about. Jumping on to how this guidebook can work for your church. You want to think about, is what you've made relevant? Some of the stuff that I would include, for example, like a diaper changing policy, may be totally irrelevant to you all. And that's fine. You want to make sure you're being sensitive to your church culture. If you know that people are going to be really hesitant about this book, then figure out the best way to do it so they'll be receptive, because you want it to be a success. 1, you don't want to go all this time and effort for it to be a failure. But 2, if you, as volunteers and children's ministers and senior ministers, see this as valuable, then you want to make sure that it's a success. You also want to be sensitive to your children's ministry structure. If you're a large church and have lots of divisions in your ministry, like lots of different areas of maybe staff being over those areas, you may want to structure your booklet differently. If you have birth through college all in your children's ministry or youth ministry, which is possible, I mean, definitely. I mean, there's churches that are structured that way. You may want to think about that. So be sensitive to the structure of your ministry. Another thing is, do you want any sort of like visual component, like a DVD? Would you want to have a visual part of your guidebook? You know, like this volunteer information video. You pop it in and there's kind of different places where you go on a menu to pick what you want to hear about. Would you want kind of an addition to your guidebook? Do you have anything else you'd want to include? If you were tailoring this to teachers, would you want to, there's pocket guides out for discipline, pocket guides for special needs. If this was a specific to volunteers guidebook, would you want to put this in a little pocket in your guidebook? And if that's the case, then that affects your layout, but slide it in the back. I'm thinking, wow, I want to do that. Why didn't I do that before? But you can slide that in the back of a guidebook. There are also pamphlets out, leading a child to Christ, leading a friend to Christ. If this was specifically for parents guidebook, you might want to have a little pocket in the back where you slide this in. If you're going to do this thing every year, that might be in a back pocket where you would slide a special events list or something like that. Lots of things to think about. The nice thing about adding a visual component is it does make it a little more fun for the person reading it because they have something that just looks a little different. I want to take just a minute or two, if you'll turn to the person next to you, and think about what would be your church's information needs that are specific to your church. For example, if you require every year a child to fill out a permission form to go on trips or a permission form to go on special activities, you might want to include that. I don't know. But what would be something specific that your church would need to include in a guidebook?
You have a guidebook. It's not a book. It is.
Different.
Here's a section. Here's a section. Here's a section.
Okay, if we could draw attention back. I hope you all have thought a little bit about your needs. Some other things to think about is for your specific church, when would you use this guidebook? We've been talking about this the whole time, but when would you use it? You know, are you going to use it specifically to welcome new volunteers and parents? Do you want to use it as a tool to share with your church leadership? Is this something you could give to your elders and say, hey, learn about our ministry? I don't know. Maybe it's not a fit. Maybe it is. Would you keep it, if you have a welcome desk for your children's ministry, would you keep it there always available for people or at your church office? Also, to whom and how would you provide it? Let's say you're going to give it to everybody. Great. Are you going to introduce it one day from a meeting? You know, hey, this is our guidebook. Welcome to our ministry. Just want to let you know we're going to be offering this now. Would you do that at a volunteer meeting or a children's, some sort of general children's ministry meeting for parents? Also, how are you going to get it to people? Are you going to mail it? If that's a concern you have is mailing budgets, like postage and things like that, you may not want to mail it if you have a concern about postage costs. So you may want to provide it to your classrooms. What about getting it to parents who don't come with the kids, if the kids just come on their own? How do you get it to those parents? Things like that to think about. Are you going to give it out only to new families? Are you going to give it out to families who've been in the church for a long time, but only if it's requested? Things like that. And then how would you see this being shared in your church for you specifically to think about? Do you see this fitting a certain way? Do you see this being readily available every week? Do you see this only coming out at the beginning of the year? Do you see it coming out at the beginning of the year, but always being available in case you have a visitor? Things like that. Wanted to throw out, Stephen Kay and I were talking when we were brainstorming here just a second ago. A great point. Kay and Steve are in a different setting than a lot of us would be in our churches. But one of the comments was, not only are you possibly not going to see the parents of the children at their church, even when you do see them, or if you went to see them to take them a book, their ability to read may or may not be there. They may be illiterate. And one of the things that I think we do need to be sensitive to, again, is our culture in our church. If we have a lot of people in our church who we know maybe have difficulty reading lengthy essays and things like that, think about that. I mentioned several years ago, I worked with a family, and that was a consideration. We had a family going through the Following Jesus booklet, but it was difficult for one of the parents to actually read through it with their child, and so the child and the mom and I met together, and we worked through it. And so I hadn't even thought about that. But if you have more than, say, one or two families in your church who do struggle with reading and who do rely on you as volunteers or children's ministers to work with their kids, then how do you make this information, if it's that vital to your ministry, how do you make it available to those parents? And I don't know the answer to that right off the top of my head. Probably sitting down and working through it with them and just verbally telling them about these things. But if that information is that important and you want those parents to know about it, then figuring out how you're going to get it to those parents. Okay, I know it's a lot of information, I think, or at least it feels like a lot of information to me. I want to make sure we have time for questions. So, questions. Do you guys have anything you'd want to talk about, share from your brainstorming sessions regarding the guidebook? Like, hey, we just had this great idea. We know how we'd use this. Do you have questions in general about children's ministry topics that have popped up while we've looked through this? Like, why would you do that, Nikki, or why would you include that? We've got some time, and I'd love to answer those questions if I could.
I really like this section about what you do with extra time. And I think that would be helpful if this were in the room, and maybe we're a new teacher or something, and I say, yeah, there are some ideas. Mm-hmm. Because I think a lot of children's ministry, we might get the teaching done in 20 minutes, mm-hmm. Done over an hour and a half. And we have teachers who just play, and I think that's maybe the culture a lot of times is that children's ministry equals play.
Yeah.
And how we can tailor that play time, because I think we have a lot of unused time, and using this as an encouragement, I think would be really helpful, at least for us.
Yeah, when we that, in case you're not sure what that section is. It's in the appendix of the sample guidebook. We had that in this blue folder. And the reason we added it was for that very reason, is that we'd have people in our classes who were great volunteers, loved being in there, but maybe they did have a little extra time. Or, and I don't know if this happens, but perhaps the adult worship service goes a little long, and the teacher prepared for an hour and, and got everything done within the hour, but then the service runs maybe 10 more minutes. What do I do with those 10 more minutes? And depending on the size of your ministry, the budget of your ministry, you may or may not have lots of board games or things available in your classroom for the kids to play. And the other thing is, do you want them playing those things? Do you want to make that usable? Do you want to have Bible verse games and activities? And so having a section like that is helpful for that reason. And I'm excited to kind of look through this with my team. Like I said, this is very much a sample. It's not something that we use at our church. It's basically pulling a lot of our practices and putting it in something that I think could be a sample, a general sample for anybody to kind of build off of. But I think the how-tos, or if you have like one of these booklets, sometimes we have questions about, well, what do we do if we have unruly kids in our class and we can't get their attention? If that's something that is an issue at your church, having that in a how-to section might help. Or how do I calm down a child who's upset because they miss their parents? Especially like if you're working in a preschool class. That might be something to include. Other thoughts or questions?
Sounds like, from some of your earlier, very first comments, what you do in your church, you could have a master guidebook, but then you could also have mini guidebooks, and M-I-N and M-A-N-Y, where you have one for this group of people, you have one for this group of people. If the information, 3/4 of the information is the same, fine, but you still are tailoring it for 5th grade. Just take them as an example. Would you have something then for all parents or parents of 5th grade? Could you have just make it that specific as well?
Kind of up to you, I think. My thought is, if you don't have a lot of specific to 5th grade activities, probably no need to do it specifically. Now, another way to look at this is, we don't have this, but I'm thinking, it'd be good. If you wanted, for example, if you wanted a very special something for your 5th graders, doing something that includes the activities, your goals for that year for the 5th graders. The reason I say 5th graders is our ministry, children's ministry, ends with 5th grade. In 6th grade, they go up. You might even include a devotional in that guidebook for the year. Maybe make it a teaching tool as well. Maybe include a section in there where for parents, like, hey, these are topics that we're going to talk about in classes throughout the year. Here's some talking points for you maybe that you'd want to talk through with your kids throughout the year that we're going to be talking about in classes. So in addition to giving basic information, you could make it very much a teaching tool for the parent as well. That would be a whole different look and feel, but it might be helpful. One of the things tied to this, I'm just thinking kind of in structure. We do a 5th grade mission trip, and until this year, every year I'd give them an information booklet, a devotion booklet, and a journal. 3 different books, 1, 2, 3, they all had it. Recently I went on a trip and they gave a whole book that had everything in it. It was an all-encompassing booklet. Well, one of my coworkers had gone on the same trip earlier in the year and they showed me this and I thought, oh my goodness, they have basically like kind of the idea of a devotional or, thoughts in this book. They have your basic trip information in this book and they've got a journal in this book. Wow, I need to do that. And so I put it all into one book for our 5th grade mission trip, and it's so much better because I just have to say, do you have your orange booklet? Do you have your orange booklet? I don't have to ask about the 3 different things. So looking at it that way, then I think structure-wise, maybe a comprehensive thing is better. But if you really want to specifically target one age group, having something specific might be helpful. Another thing to think about is, I don't know if your churches ever have interns. One of the things that I've done in the past with our interns is I have a binder. And I'm just thinking, oh, Nikki, I need to do that before January because we have a new intern coming. But there's a binder, and they just flip open, and it has all the basic information I'd want them to know as an intern. So thinking about that, what would I want if I had someone coming in that was going to work with me every day? What would I want them to know, and what I would want them to back up policy-wise? Those things in that binder might be the same things I'd want to put in a volunteer binder. At the same time, if you do have interns, that's a helpful thing to provide them with as a guidebook because it's going to be hard enough for them to learn the names of the kids, let alone all your policies. So having that all in a booklet that they can flip through is also very helpful if you were ever having an intern. Or a new staff member. If you have staff members, in addition to, maybe you have area staff members, like a preschool staff member, things like that, having a guidebook for them so that they're prepared when they join the staff so they know what's going on. So as I think about this, we probably have like 5 or 6 different guidebooks that are just not called a guidebook. Any other questions, thoughts?
We have a little issue in our church of making people understand why we have guidelines, and even though we try to keep it very positive, the guidelines and everything, it seems like they feel more like it's rules that we're trying to impose on them. And, whenever you talk about like the nursery or things like that, well, I've had 12 kids and I know how to do this, and you can't tell me how to change a diaper, I know how to change a diaper. They don't want to go by your guidelines. They don't see that they're important. They think, I'm the one volunteering here, I'm giving up my time, leave me alone, I'm doing what I want. What do you do?
Well, a couple thoughts. One thought is that it's important for you to relay whatever the important vision is for your ministry to your senior minister, first off. Because if you have all these guidelines and policies, they need to understand why you have them. Sometimes that's not possible. You may not have their ear, they may not have the availability. But if safety is important, then you need to let your senior, and this may be even more important in a small church then, to let your senior minister know, hey, safety is important to me. This is why we're going to do X, Y, and Z. I want to make sure you understand it so that if anybody disagrees with me or doesn't want to follow along with it, I want you to understand why we do this. Do you have any questions? Do you disagree with that? Yada, yada. Why? Because they can protect you and encourage you, ideally, if you have problems. That's a very important thing to me, making sure the senior minister's on board. Because if they're not on board with the guidelines and rules you have, and people come and disagree with you all the time, and they don't support you either, you're going to have a lot of trouble. So it's better just to go and get them in support first. Secondly, I would say, do they understand why they're in place? Do they understand that it's for the safety of the children? Beyond, it's for the safety of the children. Have you ever done a safety workshop or a safety meeting? Or do you constantly repeat, this is for the safety of the children, this is for the safety of the children, this is the safety of the children? I mean, honestly, people probably get sick of hearing me say that. Why? Because it is pretty much the key thing that drives me in children's ministry right now. Why? Because it breaks my heart and will make me ill if I ever think of a child in my ministry and care being hurt on my watch. Honestly, I'll probably break down in tears in 2 seconds because that's how much it makes me ill. So my team knows that. My staff knows it. They know that the 2 things that will drive me to have a lengthy discussion with my staff is if I think there's an unsafe situation or if I think that any child's been picked on or treated not well. Those are the 2 things that drive me. You say, well, where's Christ fit in that? Well, where Christ fits in is that if my kids are not being treated safely or well, they're not going to come to the building anyhow. So I'm not going to be able to talk to them about Christ if they're not being loved and protected. So I got to get that done first in order for me to talk to them about Jesus. That's the way I view it. So the reason I say that is this a passion to you beyond policy? And if they know it's a passion to you and they understand why you're doing this, talk to them, talk to them, talk to them. If you can't get them on board, and this may be hard if you don't have that many volunteers, you may need to say, see ya. You may not want to do that. I've lost a volunteer before because they didn't want to fill out a background check form. And it was hard, and then I heard a little bit, down the road, I heard so-and-so wouldn't fill out the background form. Sorry. If it's important enough that you're going to do what needs to be done to get those policies in place, then it's got to be important enough for you to not have someone serve if they're not willing to support it. That's very hard, especially if you have a lot of relationships with those people, and I understand because I grew up in the church where I serve. It is hard. But if it is important to you, then you've got to make sure it happens. That's where it's key to get your senior minister on board.
For us, on that same topic, we took the tactic that this is part of us building infrastructure for future growth for people who don't yet come.
Yes, great point.
And we preached that, I know that this is how you did it for 4 years, and we know that that was okay. But that is just plain not going to be acceptable for any young parent nowadays. And aren't those young parents crazy? They're crazy. And we talked about them as crazy germaphobes. And we said, and yes, our youth minister is exactly like this. You're going to see, so Tommy is crazy.
Yeah.
And so we talked about that.
Sanitize well.
Yeah, and so we took the tactic that this is you helping us build infrastructure for these new people that don't yet come. And if we don't do this, there will be no place for these kids in 10 years.
Because new families are like that.
And that's a great point, and because one of the things just tied to that is just perception. One of our policies is that we don't allow men to change diapers in the nursery, and we also don't allow pregnant women to change diapers. The reason is that there's bacteria. That's just what we've been told, is there's bacteria when changing diapers that if not, like, I guess hands aren't washed well, that it can affect the mother who's pregnant. So it's more for the safety of the mom. So that's why we implemented that. We visited several nurseries several years ago because we felt like our nursery was not where we wanted it to be. So we visited several nurseries in the area and we basically pulled best practices from those nurseries and implemented them. We talk about perception. Tied to this, were you going to ask Scott about why we don't allow men to change diapers? Okay. It's a lot of it, or take kids to the bathroom. A lot of it's tied to perception. And you all may disagree with it, and that is okay. If you do, fine, so fine. And I struggle with it, honestly. I struggle with it.
I'm okay not changing.
Yeah. But I struggle with the rule. I struggle with the rule because I feel like it should be okay. But statistically, and I would need to double check, I don't have the statistics with me, and maybe it's not statistically numerically accurate, but I think the perception is that men tend to be more likely to molest children than females. And so if you go into a nursery and you are a visitor, new to the church, and you see a, to you, strange male changing your child's diaper, you may be less comfortable with leaving your child in that nursery. The same with taking a child to the bathroom. So we made that decision several years ago. We did have somebody that stepped out of the nursery because they felt like we ought to be able to change the diaper. My thought was, who really wants to change a diaper? That was my thought. I don't want to change a diaper. I mean, and so I thought, well, I understand though, because you should feel like if you're going to be in the nursery, you ought to be able to do whatever anybody else can. The reason for pregnant women I already mentioned. That's more for their safety than the child's safety. We also make sure with diaper changing stations that they're always in the room, visible. They're not in a bathroom. Unless the door is open and always propped. We do have one exception where the diaper changing table has to be in the bathroom because of the setup of the classroom for weekday preschool. So the door is always propped open so people can see in and out. The reason we do that is so that there's always a witness for what's happening when the diapers are being changed. Ideally, hopefully, nothing unsafe will ever happen in your ministries, but just in case, it's protecting you. The same reason we have 2 people rules in the classroom. There's always 2 people in the room. Same with the bathroom. If you have a child that needs to be helped in the bathroom with wiping or something, that needs to be done with 2 people. One person that helps with the wiping, the other person stands in the doorway to make sure that everything's okay and that they're visible to the other people in the classroom. And we have women do that for the same reason as the diaper changing. The reason why it needs to be an adult, not a teenager, is because we feel like adult women are more experienced, well, adults, not adult women, but adults are more experienced in wiping than teenagers would be. And when I say adult, I mean 18 and up. So, yes.
Another tactic we took, because it was a difficulty for us to get people behind us who maybe do it before we came along and told them how to do it, was we did sex abuse prevention training, curriculum, and all of these questions started coming up with all these folks who've been volunteering for 100 years as a result of that. And so for us to implement some of these things became much easier.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. But those are topics that aren't fun to talk about, and they're not easy, and they're uncomfortable. But a lot of it, your visitors, people new to your church, are going to be sensitive to these, especially, because they want to know that their kids are going to be safe. And like I said, I really believe if you don't have a safe, loving environment, people aren't going to stick around long enough for you to teach them about Jesus. Other thoughts or questions?
I think the fact that you have a guidebook means you're wanting to go somewhere. And I think that is a change for some places, that children's ministry wasn't always a place that we went anywhere. You learned a song, or you had a snack and we were playing.
Yeah.
So the fact I think that we get pushback is that it's a growth, and we always get pushback. And so for us, change sometimes takes time. And if we have to be patient with our churches, we need to be strict about our guidelines, but we need to be patient because we're wanting to take people on. And that doesn't always happen.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because I'm in a church where I grew up, so I love my church and I'm very sensitive to the people in it because they're like my family. Not everybody's going to see that the same way because they don't have those relationships. And so I think it's key to make sure that you are patient with people because honestly, some of the people that seem like they're giving you pushback may just need to understand. And they may just need to have the time with you talking and seeing what kind of things you're suggesting so that they can get on board. Sometimes people just want to hear it and understand it. It's not that they don't want to do it, it's just they may say they don't want to do it, but it's just because they don't understand why you'd ever want to do it in the first place. So I think making sure you're talking through these things with people is very important. And so really setting the vision for why you'd want to have something like this at all is key to the whole process, I think, being a success. So, any other questions? I know we're probably about out of time. So thank you.